few hours ago, I completed a survey for Omniplex Cinema here in Sunderland. I try to do surveys when I can because I think that it's useful in terms of marketing feedback. I'm not the sort of person to complain about something and then miss an opportunity to put that somewhere, because I do believe it's used. Hopefully in a practical way. I mean, how can companies get public feedback if people don't correspond? So that I do believe in doing that. Um, I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about cinema and where cinema is today. That is the big screen. Um, there's been a lot of things that have affected the industry, the film industry in general. Of course, COVID that affected everything, but it affected filmmaking. It's been a bit of a rebound from that, but I believe it may have had some permanent impact on social habits that people have, including going to the cinema. The Hollywood writer strikes have had an impact on the film industry as well. I also believe that the dominance of the Marvel universe, superhero movies, has been a factor. I mean, clearly there's a popularity there. Those films have been incredibly successful. Collectively they've generated billions, so they've been incredibly successful. It's not really my cup of tea, with one or two exceptions. I'm not really into them, but clearly that's been a big marketing thing. But if you compare cinema of the 2020s to cinema of, say, the 1970s or the 1990s, both of which I consider golden decades of filmmaking, the 80s probably as well. But, the 70s and 90s particularly had some very good films. Um, it's not to say that there's no good movies out there, there definitely are. But today, the sort of epic films that would have got attention in the past tend to be quite far down the list. If you have a historic epic film, in the vein of, say, Titanic or Gone with the Wind, that sort of film today might be quite successful, but I don't think it would even be in the top 10 commercially. Possibly it would. But what happens today, or what seems to get the success today, is franchise films. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, it's just an observation. So, were Titanic released today, I still think it would be successful, but not as successful just because of the way the film industry has changed. Um, I think that there's other factors involved. Now, specifically thinking of Omniplex, just a bit of background, it's an Irish chain. Here in Sunderland, we had Empire Cinemas and it closed last year. Um, Actually, I think it was mid 2023. Anyway, there was a long hiatus of just over a year where Sunderland didn't have a single cinema, which wasn't as long as our previous hiatus between, I think, 1999 and 2004. Sunderland didn't have a single cinema, despite having a population within the city itself of 180,000 people. So that was quite something. I remember, if me and my friends went to the cinema, we had to either go to Newcastle or the Metro Centre or Bolden, because there was a multiplex at that time, UGT, Bolden Colliery, which is a group of villages north of Sunderland. Um, so anyway, when the Empire closed, I was very disappointed. But then we got a cinema back, a different chain. They just changed the name, but they kept the screens. That was wonderful. But what they've done recently is they've had a big revamp. So the interior has been completely remodeled. I admit it looks good. They have a very sort of stylistic approach. I mean, even the bathroom looks like, it's stylish looking. It's sort of black and yellow tiles, and it gives a sort of fancy hotel look about it. If this kind of retro style big van thing inside it. I mean, it looks good. It's very clean. But there has been a significant price increase. But for me, someone who is not in stable work, that's significant and it's very disappointing. And I told them so. Um, they now have these very comfortable seats, which is nice. But honestly, given a choice between an affordable ticket and a luxury seat, I'll choose the affordable ticket. And I think this is very much the principle of don't fix what isn't broken. There was nothing wrong with the cinema the way it previously was. Um, Maybe it's because it was pretty similar to Empire, and they're a new company, or they're the company that's taken over the. So maybe they thought, well, we better leave our own mark on this. But I think it's a case of don't fix what isn't broken. There was nothing wrong with the system before, and there's simply a big difference between a ticket at 5.95 versus 8.95. And 8.95 is actually the lower tariff. Some of the seats are 10.95, and that is still cheaper than Cineworld, which to me is ridiculously overpriced. And I don't see anything about Cineworld that is better than other cinema chains to justify the much higher price. Um, it matters. For someone who has a disposable income and is in a very steady job, you might think, oh, well, it's a night out, I'm willing to pay for that. But for someone like myself who is in part-time work, it makes a big difference. So there's several movies I want to see. I want to see the Formula One film with Brad Pitt. I want to see the new Jurassic World film. I'm thinking about the Superman film, although I could probably sacrifice that one. But I may have to sacrifice more than one, and that's compared to what some people go through in this world, that's nothing, obviously. But as a lover of cinema and a lover of the big screen, it's something I may have to do, and it's frustrating because you know, had the tickets been 5.95, I would have went. Now, um, there's a few other things that have changed. There's now ticketless. I like the idea of having a physical ticket. I suppose you could say it's more ecologically friendly this way, but I just like the idea of having a ticket with the film name printed on it. I keep them actually as little souvenirs. Maybe that's my quirky habit. I guess a lot of people don't care, but to me, that's part of the cinema experience, having the film with the title printed on it. But if we look across the board, I don't know if there's been any in-depth studies done on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if the overall number of people going to the cinema has decreased. And I mentioned the pandemic, I mentioned the dominance of the Marvel universe, I mentioned the cost. Um, Probably the existence of online streaming platforms has been another factor. Now, I use Netflix. I admit there's a lot of good stuff on it. I recently watched The Serpent, the BBC drama about the French serial killer Charles Sobrage. It was gripping. It was well made. Um, and I'm going to watch the new Squid Game. Um, Series. So I think there is a lot of good stuff on Netflix. But to me, you can't beat the big screen as a cinematic experience. There's a few other things they've done which I'm not a fan of. Recently, I've noticed they've been bringing in regular commercials, like television commercials. Well, when I go to the cinema, I want escapism. I want to be entertained. I don't want a lecture about why I shouldn't drink milk because it's, from PETA or something like that. I'm not saying that it's not legitimate for charities to reach out. Obviously, that's what they do. But honestly, you go to the cinema for escapism. You don't go to the cinema to be lectured. PETA had this ad where there was this creepy guy leering over a woman and telling her he wanted her milk, and it was meant to be a sort of pitch about, the dairy industry. Okay, that they have principled viewpoints, but I don't want to go to the cinema and be lectured. Okay, so I don't like that they're putting in those regular commercials. I've no problem with trailers. They've always had movie trailers. In fact, I like seeing trailers. It's part of the cinema experience, but I don't know. It's just one of those things, it changes and the consumer has no say, and you just have to, that's the way it is. So I gave my feedback. I tried to be balanced. I didn't want to be all negative. I mentioned that staff are polite and professional. It is clean. It does look good. Um, the seats are comfy, but really, it's a question of don't fix what isn't broken. As far as I know, there wasn't some big public demand for a change. Maybe there was, maybe I missed it. But I also asked about the movie I saw. So 28 years later, I'm not going to make a specific review on that, so I'll just mention it briefly here. I thought it was very good. Um, was it a worthy sequel? For the most part, yes. There's only one bit I wasn't too fussed on. Now, when you go to see that sort of film, like effectively a zombie movie, you're going to have scenes that are a bit gross and a bit extreme. But there was one scene I thought was a bit over the top, where one of the infected was heavily pregnant, and this Swedish soldier basically, he freaks out and he machine guns her. Then her mates, remember they're not fully human, then kind of rampages through the train. It's just a gross scene, and it's really, I thought that was a bit over the top. I thought that was too much. Um, for that sort of film, you do expect blood, you do expect gore, but that to me was a bit. I'm just looking back on it, but I did like the utilization of Rudyard Kipling's. I believe it was a Rudyard Kipling poem, "Boots," in the Boer War. That was used in the trailer. It was used in the film, and it's this community on Holy Island. That's another thing I liked about the movie. It was set in this region. Father and his son go out, and it's sort of a mark of manhood where teenagers have to kind of go onto the mainland to get a hunt, and I thought it was very well made. I thought it was a worthy sequel to 28 Days and 28 Weeks. Um, Little bit of a closed ending in the sense that the main protagonist, he kind of breaks away from the community and then joins another community on the mainland, and we see a character from the start of the film. I don't know. I thought the ending could have been a little bit more to it than that. But overall, I'd rank 28 Years Later a strong 7 out of 10. More or less delivered, had some good scenes, and I like the fact that it's set up in this area, and it's good for the region to have a big movie set here. Um, but yeah, just generally the film industry, I think it would be utterly tragic if the big screen. I mean, during the pandemic, I really had a concern that cinema would die. That hasn't quite happened, but I would not at all be surprised if the number of people going to the cinema has decreased. Cinema food is absurdly overpriced. Now, I'm sure a lot of people sneak in snacks because honestly, if like popcorn is 4.99 for a box this size, I don't know. I just think people aren't going to pay that. Some will, but it's ridiculously overpriced now. The argument for this is, well, there's overheads, they need to pay for the luxury seats, etc. I get that, but it's a bit like public transport. It's a bit like trains being overpriced. It's kind of a double-edged sword. If you are so pricey that it puts people off, then they're not going to go and you're going to lose footfall. So I think what I actually said to them was, at least you're cheaper than Cineworld. So please keep it that way. I just don't go to Cineworld out of principle. I just think it's too expensive. I like the big screen, but unless I really, really want to see a film, I'm not going to pay 12.95 for one movie. Unless I really want to see it, like I'm dying to see it. Um, but that's how I feel about it. Like I say, there will be people with a very comfortable income. This won't make much difference to them. But for those of us who are just getting by, it's a significant difference. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think the big screen is dying? I mean, I've nothing against streaming services, although I do think the situations, for example, I was watching Manifest, which is a sort of science fiction drama about a plane that mysteriously turned up 5 years after going missing. The first and second seasons were quite gripping, but then Netflix didn't have the third season and it suddenly had the fourth season. They didn't even have the third season, and then suddenly they brought the third season into it. Doesn't make sense. So you can't really catch up with that. The other problem with streaming services is if you're not on it, you can't see it. Now, I suppose you can make the argument, I don't know, about whether or not you afford a cinema ticket, but the thing about streaming service is you're kind of paying for, it's like a subscription, so you're paying monthly, and then you know, you need to find things you like. Now, something like Netflix, I do think it's more varied than people give it credit for. I do think there's a lot of stuff there. And I don't think it's actually that woke. I think there is a lot of conventional films there, actually. But if streaming services destroyed cinema, I would not be happy about that. But I also think cinema chains shoot themselves in the foot by overpricing. Um, and just changing things when people haven't asked for it. I I don't know. Please let me know your ideas. Do you think that there is a threat to the cinema industry? Do you like going to the cinema? I mean, some people aren't that bothered. Some people are, oh, I've got a streaming service, doesn't matter. Personally, I am a fan of the big screen. I do that. I don't think you could beat that. I don't think you could beat that atmosphere of being behind a big screen. There's something special about that, which online streaming will never be. I suppose you could argue it's the comfort of your own home. You can watch with your partner or your family. But no, for me, the big screen has something special. And I think if it was to vanish, then some entrepreneur will bring it back in a retro way and they'll find it very popular. Um, but if I was running a cinema chain, I'd be competitive. I wouldn't make it ridiculously cheap either. Obviously, it's a business that has to be factored in. But I do believe don't fix what isn't broken. Um, So I'm disappointed that Omniplex has done that. But I am grateful we have a cinema in Sunderland, and I just hope they don't close this one. And I hope they don't raise prices further. And I've told them so. But 28 years later, yeah, good movie, worth checking out. Um, Let me know your thoughts on the film industry and specifically the big screen. Movie theaters if you're in the US, cinemas if you're in the UK. I hope they don't vanish. I think the big screen is something special. Let me know your thoughts.